Hey everyone, this is Darlene, Kate's podcast producer. Kate is away this week taking a short summer break. While she is away, we are re-airing one of her most downloaded and popular episodes. She will be back with a brand new episode in a couple of weeks. And now, here is the episode, Should I Stay or Should I Go?
Welcome to another episode of the Divorce Survival Guide podcast, where we have real, honest, smart, and sometimes even hilarious conversations about co-parenting, separation, and divorce, and all that goes along with that. I'm Kate Anthony, your divorce survival guide, certified life and relationship coach, and happily divorced mom who helps women decide if they should stay in or leave their marriages and then guides them through the process one step at a time. Hey everybody, I am super excited about today's episode, and I'm just going to go straight into it because it's such a rich conversation. My guest this week is my friend and colleague, Quentin Hafner. Quentin is a marriage and family therapist, but as you'll soon find out, he is not your ordinary therapist. I first reached out to Quentin because we do similar work in the world, but the more we've gotten to know each other, the more obvious it is how aligned we really are on some pretty deep levels when it comes to creating and maintaining healthy relationships. And Quentin's insights into the big question, should I stay or should I go, are invaluable. Don't forget to check the show notes for links to find Quentin's website and his blog and to follow him on social media. And without further ado, here is my conversation with Quentin Hafner. Hey, Quentin.
Hey, Kate.
Thanks for coming on and talking about this really important topic that we both like to jam on, and can probably do incessantly.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because when we've talked about it recently, I really like hearing your thoughts on it. So I think it'll be fun.
Yeah, same. So we are talking about should I stay or should I go, which is a big topic of conversation. And I think that you and I love how we each have three things that we really dive into on this topic. So we're gonna try and cover all six, and they'll probably blend together. So
yeah, awesome.
All right.
Yeah.
So let's talk about what I love that the way that you break this down is that there are three big reasons that you think that marriages often fail, and then you attack them from a particular point of view, and you have an emotional versus objective viewpoint. Can you sort of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So I, in my experience, having worked with people in the kind of like the should I stay or should I go scenario, where maybe their marriage is just in a really tough place, and they're asking themselves like this question. Generally, people fall into like three pretty distinct kind of categories when they talk about maybe potentially getting a divorce. So what I hear a lot, like in my practice, is if people people will often say to me, we just don't feel compatible anymore. And so then therefore divorce makes sense. So I hear that one a lot.
Yeah. What do they mean by that? When they say they don't feel compatible, what does that mean to them? I mean, I'm sure it means different things to different people, but if it's the same language, I'm curious as to what you're finding.
Yeah. So when people say that they're not compatible, I think what they're really trying to say is that they're really just tired of fighting. When it kind of like, when it really kind of comes down to it, it's kind of like their way of kind of just making their best way of just making sense of all the conflict that they're experiencing in the relationship. So when people are fighting a lot over a long period of time, it's kind of easy just to ask yourself, like, I don't know, maybe we're just not compatible anymore. Maybe our compatibility differences is the way that we could just best make sense of the conflict that we've been feeling. So, I think And I think you touch on something about communication in one of your three things.
Yeah, it's funny because I was just thinking, I was like, oh, this sounds essentially like it's the same, sort of the same sphere as my communication stuff.
Yeah. So I get that not compatible. A lot of people say we're not compatible anymore. And that's a really good one, because I think, I mean, if you tell if you're trying to explain the reason you're getting a divorce, if you say that, hey, we're just not compatible anymore, I think like generally by and large, most people will say, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. So it's a pretty reasonable one.
Yep.
And then the second one I hear a lot is that we're just not happy anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like time to move on. And I think that one's kind of like self-explanatory. I think people, for different reasons, they just don't feel good about the relationship anymore. The relationship probably hasn't felt good for a really long time. And they genuinely have been really unhappy. And so if you haven't been happy for several years and you attribute a lot of your unhappiness to your marriage, I think people can get behind that idea for a divorce as well.
Right.
And then the last one that I talk about and that I hear a lot is that we're just not in love anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm.
And, people say, we haven't felt feelings of love in a really long time. And that's not how marriage is supposed to feel. So if it feels like we're not in love, then something must be really wrong, and we maybe ending the marriage makes sense.
Right.
So not compatible, not happy, and not in love is what I hear a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
And so when you break these things down for people, you talk about, like I said before, the emotional versus the objective, right? The emotional is we don't feel compatible, we don't feel in love, we don't feel happy, right? And then you break down these feelings into something a little bit more objective to help people get through them, because of course you can't argue, you can't work through I'm not happy or we're not in love. It's sort of a conversation stopper, right? It doesn't leave room for broadening and expanding. And so you take these more objective viewpoints around each one of these to help people really, really get underneath what that means, right?
Exactly. Because I think when people say, for example, if someone says, we're not happy anymore and it's time to move on. Mm-hmm. I think that, there's so many problems with that. So you can kind of look at it two ways. If you do decide to end the marriage, I think you have to create a better narrative for yourself than I wasn't happy.
Yeah.
Because I think if you do get a divorce and you want to sleep well at night, feeling good about the decision you made, I don't think that just saying that you weren't happy is going to give people enough of a satisfactory explanation for making such a big decision.
Right.
So when people say they're not happy, of course, I totally empathize with it. And I say, gosh, that really sucks. But that's such a vague kind of statement. And it's a little I think there's just too much ambiguity in it. So I think helping people discover really what it is that is going on in the relationship. So really they can come up with a really good understanding and explanation themselves, so they can, when they have to talk to people about it, when they have to talk to friends about it or family, or if they have to talk to their kids about it, they can really craft a very good narrative in their own mind that just gives them a certain peace of mind. So that's what I like to help people with that. So that's why I don't like the in love thing. And then on the flip side of that, I work with a lot of couples who are on the edge of divorce, and when they say they're not happy, and when we kind of dig into that a little bit more, we realize that the things that they're not happy about are actually fixable. Mm-hmm. it's like, okay, well, now we have a better understanding of what this idea of unhappiness means. And in this context, it means changing this thing or that thing and this thing. And then, you can avoid a divorce. So on both sides, I think it's really important for either camp, whether they decided to stay married or get a divorce, to have like just a better understanding of what's going on. And so on the happiness one, and these are all like a little bit interchangeable, so they're not like concrete. But like on the happiness one, I talk to people about, instead of saying, okay, I'm unhappy, I talk about these things called like the 6 non-negotiables. So the 6 non-negotiables are loyalty, affection, support, freedom, respect, and companionship. And then I try to help people find a little bit more clarity on like which of these 6 things is really missing or which thing is really lacking. And then because when people say they're not happy, it's like 99 times out of 100 it has to do with one of these 6 things. And it's not all of these 6 it's very rare that it's all of these 6 things, but it's at least a few of these 6 things that are missing or not working well.
Yes.
And then when people understand that, it becomes more clear, like, okay, well, are these solvable, or are these things that are, that's why I call them non-negotiables, because these 6 things, they really have to be present in a relationship for it to be successful.
So say what those 6 things are again. I just want to make sure that everyone heard them.
So loyalty, affection, support, freedom, respect, and companionship.
I can see where most of my clients have at least one, or if not a large portion of those things missing in their marriages. For sure, right? And that's
a large portion. I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
That leads to a lack of happiness, obviously, right?
Right.
And then, the thing one of the things that I talk about a lot is of being one of the things that leads a lot of the women that I work with to ending their marriages or contributes, I think, to divorce a lot. And that I work with people on is self-worth. And this idea that our spouses are supposed to make us happy. And if we're not, we have to be responsible for our own happiness. And how are we seeking that outside of our spouses? Are we coming to the table as a full, independent, complete, happy person? Or are we coming as a little bit of an empty vessel, assuming and hoping that someone else will fill us? Which is a recipe for codependency and disaster, really. Right?
It's kind of like, even in these, that's a really great way to say it, because even in the 6 non-negotiables, the way I kind of think about it is that your partner has to give. Let me say it kind of like slightly different. These things have to be present in a relationship, but it's not the responsibility of your partner to be the sole provider of them. Right.
Great. Yes. I love that. Yes.
So it's like, if there's not loyalty between you and your partner, well, that's a huge problem, but it's not your partner's responsibility to be the only loyal person in your life.
Right.
Or you about support or anything, or affection, so.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
And that's it, right? We have to be seeking these things in many areas of our lives. And that goes into another one of the things that I always talk about, which is this idea that we have unreasonable expectations of our spouses to be all of these things.
Yeah.
That sometimes you're going to get a whole bunch of stuff from your husband or your spouse, but you may not get the emotional connection that you get, but you might get that from your girlfriends, and that might be okay. You may not get the sense of adventure and someone wanting to go out for, the kinds of adventures that you seek, but you have a group of friends that'll do that. Like, that's okay. That doesn't make you incompatible, because right? We sort of try and look for partners that like to do all the same stuff that we do, or express love in the same way that we do, or right, all of those things. And it sets the entire relationship on a really sort of tenuous foundation.
No, I love hearing you say that, because that's something I see. I just see that so much. And
Yeah.
I have kind of like an interesting theory about that. And it's not a very popular theory, being a therapist, because I blame the therapy community, the therapist community, for a lot of that thinking.
Really interesting. Say more about that.
So like, I think that, and of course, this is like a huge generalization, and there's always exceptions. And I think by and large, the therapist community has done a disservice to marriage, is because they have in some ways created part of this like unrealistic expectations about what marriage is supposed to be like. And it's like the typical example is, someone goes into therapy and they say, oh gosh, my wife, isn't doing this or isn't doing that. And the therapist goes, gosh, that's just really awful. And, you deserve to be happy. And, and kind of creates this like atmosphere, because one of my frustrations about therapists in general is that we are great at being empathic, but we are lousy at telling the truth.
Well, it's sort of taboo for for therapists, or for coaches. That's like our job, right?
Yeah,
but for therapists, it's like you're not supposed to do that.
And I think you are supposed to do that. I think it's just a lot of bad training, and and so. But I think that you're exactly right. That happens. And it's like, oh, our job is just to be supportive, and our job is just to empathize. And I've seen this happen like in real life with like colleagues, or if I get referred clients, and it's like some therapists will just empathize with somebody into their demise, into making really bad decisions, into, walking off cliffs, and because they're afraid of being confrontational and afraid of, telling the truth. And it's like, so I feel like that, the part of the problem with the unrealistic expectations comes from therapists not really setting that stage correctly, or not, setting it accurately. It's like, oh gosh, you're really upset that your wife won't have sex with you, 4 days a week, like, do you really think that that's a good expectation? Like, where did you get that expectation? Instead of, I think what they get is like, oh, that's really sad, and you deserve to be happy, and you deserve to find the sexual fulfillment that you're looking for. And then people are like, oh yeah, this is what the professional said.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, it's wrong though, so
right. Totally. Yeah, exactly. And then, and I do think so much of it, and I suffer from this in my work too, is that in therapy and in one-on-one coaching, you're only getting one side of the story, and you're not able to facilitate the conversation and then hear what the other person's needs are around that too. Like, oh, so your husband is saying that he wants to have sex 4 days a week. How do you feel about that? What do you want? Right? Like, you're just hearing one side. And I find that to be a limitation. I'll, be perfectly transparent about that. Sometimes it's a limitation in my work too, because I'm not getting, and we've talked about wanting to, wanting to move my business more in that direction as well, because, I do think that there's so much more that we can all do when we have both people in the room. Right?
Yeah. You're so right. And I took a lot of backlash for this, because I posted something on my website a while back, and I said, if you're having relationship problems and you want to save your relationship, do not go to individual therapy.
Our couples therapists used to say that to us. They said they didn't want their clients in individual therapy. They actually said, the statistics prove, and we feel that individual therapy will destroy your marriage.
Yeah. And kudos to your therapist that was willing to say that, because most therapists are not willing to say that.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I tell all my clients that too, because sometimes they might ask me like, oh, like maybe I should be and I say, no, we can work on everything that's important that you need to work on in the context of your relationship, like together right here.
Yeah.
And because I've seen that movie so many times where, somebody is struggling in the relationship, and then they go to therapy, and the next thing you know, it's like, that's the end.
Yeah.
Because they get that therapist that I think is unwilling to be confrontational, unwilling to say the hard things, and really just kind of holds their hand and kind of walks them in whatever direction they want to go, because that's one of the ideas about therapy, like especially client-centered therapy is like, we follow the client's lead.
Right.
And sometimes your client, this is like totally tangential, so just cut me off if I'm like,
whatever. Go ahead.
But it's like sometimes your clients don't even know where they're going.
Right.
You're not supposed to follow their lead. That's crazy.
Right.
So, I say that a lot. And then from all my colleagues that are therapists, like everybody was freaking out that I said that. How could you say that? And don't you know therapy is so important for people going through a hard time, and it's not just about couples work. And I'm just like, yeah, okay, I guess we all have different opinions,
Sure. And here, the flip side of this is that, or not the flip side. My ex-husband and I were in we were in individual couples therapy. We were in group couples therapy. We each had individual therapists, and we were both in 12-step programs. So we were both doing a lot of work. And, at the end of the day, it didn't work. And I actually don't think it was the individual therapy that caused our marriage to decline at all. Actually, it was the individual therapy that gave me the strength to finally leave. And that needed to happen. But yes. And so, I can hold that all is true, right? I don't know that it's black or white. And I can sort of hold the space for all things being true. But but here's the thing. If you want to do the work to save your marriage, both people are going to have to be in the room, I believe. Is that a fair? That's a little black or white, but
I have mixed feelings about that. I think ideally both people are in the room.
Yeah.
But I've also seen it where one person can change a relationship. So I know that in a perfect world, everybody shows up. Yeah. But I think more often one person doesn't want to show up. And I don't think necessarily that's the kiss of death for a relationship.
Yeah.
It's a lot harder. It takes a lot more work, and it takes a lot more patience and kind of checking your own ego. But if your primary motivation is to change the tide in your relationship, you can do that with one person. Not all the time, but
I have a lot of thoughts. I have a lot of thoughts about that that are probably mostly informed by my own experiences. So we don't need to talk.
Yeah, it's not all the time, because sometimes no matter what you do, someone is not willing or not able. But sometimes people are pliable with just one person.
And the thing I think that women find overwhelmingly, the women that I work with find overwhelmingly, is that they feel like they're doing all the work. They feel like they're the ones going to therapy. They're the ones, working with life coaches. They're the ones listening to personal development podcasts. They're reading all the books. And they're tired. They're just tired of doing all the work. So, yeah.
Well, I was doing a phone call with a client this morning, and this guy that I'm working with, and I asked him, I said, because he's having some problems with his wife or whatever. And so I said, how would you rate your wife's level of happiness, or satisfaction on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 is that she's filing for divorce, and then 10, she's ecstatic. And he's like, I would probably put her at a 3.5. And I was like, dude, that's pretty low. You guys are in a really bad place. He's like, yeah, we're in a really bad place. And I was like, well, And I said something like, well, yeah, like, possibly divorce is around the corner, who knows, right?
Yeah.
And he was like, I was so irritated with him. I almost wanted to hang up on the phone call, but he was like, no, he's like, yeah, we're both really committed and we wouldn't get a divorce. And I was like, did you really just say that? I'm like, you really just said that. I'm like, on one hand, you're telling me that your relationship's a 3.5, but on the other hand, you feel so confident that you guys won't get a divorce. I'm like,
right.
And sadly, I'm kind of piggybacking off of what you said and the wives doing all the work. Sadly,
Yeah.
so many guys have that thought process.
Right. And then this is why 69% of marriages are ended by women.
Yeah.
Because we're telling them, and I think that there's this, I don't really know what to call this, right? But I feel like there's a thing where for men, when they get married, they're in and they're kind of done. They're married. And for women, we get married and then there's like a process that's still happening, and we're still working towards this, like it's not, we're not settled once we're married. We still require a lot more than I think. And I don't know what the experience is like for men, but I just think that, 69% of women end marriages, or 69% of marriages are ended by women. And I think it's because of this idea that he's like, well, she's unhappy, but like, we're not getting a divorce. And we're like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's such a sad thing because, it doesn't have to be that way, and I think, oh gosh, that's like a whole nother topic. Do you really want to go down that road?
Sure. I mean, we'll come back around to the more, should I stay or should I go? But I mean, do you have something specific you want to say about that?
Well, I think what just came to my mind was, I think that there's a couple things. I think by and large, most guys, the overwhelming majority of guys, they genuinely, like in the bottom of their heart, really want to be good husbands.
Yeah.
Like,
I bet.
They have a sincere desire to feel proud about that role and for their wives to feel content in what they are kind of offering them. But this is what happens for so many guys. So many guys don't possess the skill set in 2018 to really to be the kind of partner that their wife is needing. And instead of saying, oh gosh, I could really use help in figuring this out, the shame that they feel from not possessing the skill set and then from continually being told that they're deficient causes them to shut down.
Yeah.
And it's in that kind of like shutting down process that becomes the poison pill for the relationship. Because in that shutting down, that's when they refuse to go to get therapy. And frankly, I can't say I totally blame them because it goes back to the therapy. I think the therapy community has done a huge disservice to men. Because instead of inviting men into therapy in a more collaborative way, I think we've threatened men and said, you better get to therapy and get your act together. And most guys are like, fuck that.
Right.
And that's kind of a natural human response to kind of being threatened.
Yeah.
And so, instead of, and I think there's a whole nother like segue about why that happens because it's like another topic, but I think just because, so I don't think men have really been fairly encouraged to go to therapy. I think therapy for men has become this really scary endeavor where they know like they're going to go in and just kind of they're going to get more shame. They're going to get attacked. They're going to be told how bad of a job they're doing. And most people don't want to pay money, or even if it was free, most people don't want to participate in that.
Right. How should we be talking to men about getting into therapy? and doing any kind of personal development work? Because we're clearly not.
Well, we're just doing it wrong.
Right. Well, exactly.
Yeah. We tell men that they are fucking losers,
Yeah.
And so the way that I like to say it, that I think has been somewhat successful, is kind of framing it more in the context of like, you're a great guy, you have a lot of great assets, you're a really great husband, but there are some things that need to get kind of like updated in 2018. And your dad probably didn't teach you those skill sets. So it's just a matter of learning some new skills.
Yeah.
And when you frame it that way, it becomes less personal. Like you're a bad guy, or you're not good enough, or you're deficient, or you can't ever do anything right. It becomes, and guys in their kind of cerebral way are like, oh, okay, so it's just about like learning some things. Like I can do that.
Right. Totally. It's sort of a more analytical, driven approach rather than, yes, absolutely.
But most people, sadly, even most therapists don't say it that way. Even in the language of, you look on, website copy for people that are trying to, draw that person. It's like, it's very shame-based language.
Yeah.
Without saying it, the general message is something's wrong with you. And if you don't figure it out, your life's going to fall apart. And that generally doesn't incite people to volunteer to sign up for something.
Sure.
So I think, saying it in the other way, like there's so many great things about you, and I don't say that in a patronizing way. I really believe that. I think for most husbands, there's so many great things about them. And, just like everything else in life, it's gotten a little bit more complex. Technology gets a little bit more complex. We have to update our phones and our computers, and we update our relationship skills too. And that's all it is. It's just about updating our skill set so we can we can function at a higher level in the relationship.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I love the way you started that, which is that like you want to be a good husband. You actually want that. You don't want to be, chastised and told that, I mean, there's so many ways in which we denigrate men in our society. And there's a lot of, toxic masculinity and a lot of things to, there are a lot of issues with masculinity in our culture. And I think that there is so much of, there's a lot of chicken and egging happening here because, it's how are we inviting men to show up? If we're not inviting them to show up with their whole hearts, with all of that, then why the hell should they? Right?
Yeah.
And we could go down a massive rabbit hole with that.
Right. And then everybody's confused why they don't want to go to therapy,
Right. Exactly.
It's like all the guys that I work with, they love coming to see me because I'm kind to them,
Right.
I'm not an asshole, and
you're not. And I think a lot of women drag their husbands to therapy to try and fix them because they want the therapist to validate them and be like, he's wrong. Right. And a lot of therapists will do that.
Unfortunately, that's a very sad testament to the therapy community.
Yeah.
And I think, the ratio for women to men therapists in California is 4-1 women to men. And so because of that, I think what you just said happens all too often.
Yeah.
Where the female therapist has kind of a conscious or an unconscious kind of alignment with the experience of the female client.
Yeah.
And says, oh my God, this kind of reminds me of my past relationship or my current relationship. And then it becomes kind of let's figure out a way to get this man to be more like you.
Right. And that's
guys are not signing up for that.
No, and nor should they. Although, and also from the female perspective, from the female coach perspective, from the woman who works with women and hears all the stories of, friends and clients and everything. It's, I also see the other side of it where women are exhausted and women are tired of asking for the same levels of support over and over and over and over again. And it starts to feed on itself, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think this is really. I mean, this is an important topic for. I think it's important for any of your female listeners that are wanting to get their husbands to therapy. Maybe it's just kind of a reminder that, of course, you're probably very frustrated and exhausted and just even burnt out in the whole process. But there's a better way to get them there. Yeah. And if it's not happening in the way that you're doing it, maybe they're just kind of exploring more options, and it's kind of like, guys, they're kind of, I'm not saying all of them, but you can kind of outsmart them, that we're not that sophisticated, like, you can use emotional intelligence to get what you're wanting. Mm-hmm. And just the idea of kind of trying to eliminate some of that shame conversation is going to be very helpful.
Yes. Oh my God, we have gone so sideways, but I
know. Sorry. Yeah.
No, please don't be willingly. So, but this is actually part of the should I stay or should I go conversation because, we've talked about this too. Because there are guys who are just like not going to go to therapy, right? And and there are women who have been. I always say to my clients, and when I talk about, like, let's talk about the shared responsibilities thing, because that's huge for women. Mm-hmm. Huge. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Feeling like they bear the brunt of everything in the household. These are especially working women. Yeah. That they're like, why is it when I work as much as you do, and even often breadwinners, right? I make more money, I work more hours, and I'm still responsible for the dishes, the laundry, the putting the kids to bed, bathing them while you sit on the couch and watch TV. Like, what is that, right? And I always say you don't get to be resentful for something that you have not directly asked for. If you have not had the direct conversation, there's the whole emotional labor conversation around, you should have asked, and why didn't you ask me? And he should have known, and all of that. And I take a split stance on that. And, one of the things that I say is that if you have not directly asked, my friends hate me because I'm constantly, every time they complain about their husbands not doing anything, I go, did you ask him to? Did you directly have the conversation? And not, you don't help, I need more help. The conversation has to be, on Tuesdays, can you please unpack the lunch boxes? Like, it has to be really specific. And, if you've had that conversation over and over again and your spouse still isn't showing up, then there's another conversation to be had.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I mean, I think
write that down for us, Quentin.
no, I don't. I just have so many thoughts, when I hear this, because I think it's probably more complex than that. Mm-hmm. First of all, I love what you're saying about asking directly. Of course, yes, for sure, because I think we all that's kind of a human issue. We all struggle with that. We have a tendency to kind of think, well, don't you just kind of know,
Right. And we all have, what we don't understand, and this is an emotional intelligence piece, right? That what we don't recognize is that we all have our own unique experience of the world based on how we were raised, where we came from, our own past experiences. So the idea that I would intuit something that you intuit naturally is just completely erroneous.
Right. It does. Yeah. It's a real setup for failure.
Totally.
When you talk about the wife being the breadwinner and the husband sits on the couch all day, or that kind of picture in your mind. Okay, yeah. I just thought, well, if that's the marriage you're in, it's like there's huge problems.
Oh,
right? You know what I mean? It's like, so like if it's really that bad, it's really bad. And so
that's a common story with my clients. So
exactly, it's a common story. However, I would say that if you're talking to both people, it's going to get a lot more complex.
So,
I mean, that's what I'm saying. If that is accurately and objectively true, huge red problems, you should probably just run for the hills because you're married to a total deadbeat.
right.
Okay. However, I would say 9 times out of 10, that story becomes a lot more complex when you talk to both people.
Sure.
And, this is not a gender issue because it could happen on either side. It's like guys tell me, oh, my wife's this and da, da, da. It's like, well, okay. Then when I talk to her, it's like the picture becomes more clear about like, oh, well, there's this happening and that happening. And so it kind of just goes back to the idea of really, it's hard to make a really good assessment without talking to both people because like in that typical example of like shared responsibilities, it could be like, well, I feel like I'm doing a lot, and you talk to the other person and they feel like, well, I feel like I'm doing a lot and you don't see what I'm doing over here. And then what you find out is that there's really just 2 genuinely good people that feel like they're not being appreciated or they feel like they're getting taken advantage of. And it usually happens on both sides. It's like when you talk to both people, everybody kind of it's like the common denominator is that, wow, you guys are both feeling this way.
Yeah.
And then it kind of like starts to change that original narrative or that original picture of like, there's this like thing happening that's really one-sided. So it just, in my experience, it's not like that when you really dig into the meat and potatoes. I know it could feel like that for somebody, but it's like everybody has a lot of feelings about it. And so it's just more emphasis to try to like, if you can talk to both people, I think you can get a better understanding.
No, absolutely. And the example I gave you is definitely an extreme example. And, the thing about this is that, and it's true, men overwhelmingly, I mean, there are tons of studies that have been done about this, right? And unfortunately, the science backs up women on this, that they do more. The science backs up that men and women think that men think they're sharing the load equally, and that women think that they're not, and that overwhelmingly women do more of the actual work. And that's been proven. I'll put the stats in the show notes. So there is truth to it, right? And so there is a cultural dynamic, and that's the thing that I help people. One of the things that I ask my clients when they're telling me all of these things, one of the things I'll often ask is, what would he say? If he were here right now, what would he say? And it really actually shifts. He's not there, obviously, but I try to invite him into the conversation because it does tend to shift their feelings. They sort of soften about that, and they'll say, "Well, he'd say that he's doing a lot and he's trying and that he's stressed, or he says that he doesn't. Every time he does it, then I'm like really naggy about how he does it, and I criticize him, or he'd say this, right? So we actually, bringing him into it without him being in the room can soften that conversation. And the other thing about it is, I lost my train of thought. Shit. Anyway, but the fact is that the science does back it. Oh, this is what I was going to say, is that I will bring the cultural aspect into it, because I think it's important. That it's not, it doesn't mean that men are wrong when they say that they feel that they're doing 50% of the work, but the science and the data show that they're actually, the women are doing 70, 75%. Well, it doesn't mean that men are wrong and bad. It's just, that's just kind of the way that you're in a pretty normal situation, if that's how you're feeling. Yeah. Right. And, we're not here to trade out one set of problems for another. And I think you and I both talk about the same things in our work in terms of should I stay or should I go, which is that 68% of second marriages fail. And I think, 73% of third marriages fail because, and my assessment.
Yeah, higher statistics than that. Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
And my assessment of that is because we just think that we're going to get rid of the problem by getting rid of the person. And that if we don't do the really hard work in this relationship, we are statistically likely to just keep repeating it over and over and over again.
Yeah, totally.
So,
Yeah.
So, and to acknowledge, right? Oh, this is actually a cultural systemic issue. This isn't a marital issue, right? How do we better invite men to share the burden without criticizing them or whatever else, so that we that we don't make it about our marriage?
Yeah, it kind of goes back to a little bit of what we were saying earlier about, like, I think so much of that is kind of leftovers from a prior generation
Mm-hmm.
where, women weren't working outside the home and the men were the breadwinners. And then, so that's like the 1940s, 1950s. And then they had children who grew up in the 70s and 80s, and kind of that was their role modeling. And then those people had children that are kind of like the present day people of we would kind of work with today.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think some of that is I would just even say maybe even a lot of that is just kind of unconscious kind of role modeling that's getting kind of perpetuated kind of going forward.
Mm-hmm.
And when you talk about it kind of that way, in a way that kind of people can digest, the conversation is really not that hard.
Yeah.
But what happens is it kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about just like people have a hard time talking about that stuff in a way that promotes togetherness or that promotes a sense of like, we're in this as teammates.
Yes.
It becomes very antagonistic, and then naturally both parties in that, like, one person's, getting told that they're fucking lazy, and the other person's like, well, I think you're fucking lazy. And then it's like, and then the whole thing just crumbles because neither one of them really possess a skill set to navigate that conversation.
Yes. Yes.
So it kind of just it would remind me of what I was saying earlier about like the work when I work with guys, and just kind of like framing it up in the context of like, hey, this is just about learning some new skills.
Yep.
You're not a bad guy. You're not fucking lazy. It's really just about possessing some new skill sets that, these things are actually not hard to solve. I mean, they really aren't. They're really easy.
Right.
It's just that if we could learn how to talk about them in a way that promotes a sense of like camaraderie together, then it's certainly possible. But sadly, most of the world doesn't have that skill set.
Yes. And the other skill, the skill that I love, right, that I love working with clients on, when I work with couples, and when I is this idea that we're always fighting over the problem, right? It's like the problem is between us, and we've got when I did my relationship coach training, there's an actual physical exercise that we do where we have couples hold either side of a pillow, and they're fighting over it, and they're pulling back and forth. And then you ask them to stand shoulder to shoulder, and you ask them if they're willing. Are you willing to look at this problem together? And if they're willing, you ask them to stand shoulder to shoulder and both hold the pillow in front of them and place it. So you're physicalizing this, placing the problem out in front. And then they're standing shoulder to shoulder to going, how do we work as a team together to solve this problem? And it's so powerful because it's what we do. We fight over a problem rather than being a team and looking at it objectively and going, this is a really big problem. Well, how the hell do we solve this? How do we work on this together? And it's a really powerful exercise. And
yeah, it sounds cool.
Yeah, it is. So
when I was in graduate school, one of my professors, I remember he has said this one time, and it was one of those things that just kind of like stuck with me forever. It was in a marital therapy class, and he said, don't get lost in the content. So meaning that like when people bring in like stuff they're fighting about like money, sex, and kids, they're not really fighting about money, sex, and kids. They're really fighting about these very deep emotional undercurrents that money, sex, and kids just has a way of kind of evoking in people. And if you get lost in the subject of money, sex, and kids, you will lose because you can't really help people solve that.
Right.
But if you can help people identify like these deeper emotions that they're really protesting about, then it creates an opportunity for people to become compassionate towards each other. It creates an opportunity for people to empathize with each other. That, you know, that, and of course, that's like the magic glue in relationships that bonds us.
Absolutely.
But if you get kind of like stuck on like, oh, you know, like we're just, you know, we can't figure out how to like make this budget or whatever. Like,
yeah, really. Yeah.
You know, it's so the pillow thing kind of reminded me of that, you know.
Yeah.
And I think that's a skill that, you know, helping people, it kind of goes back to like helping, especially for men, because men are not really good at this. Well, I could say women are not really good at it either, but just helping people identify their emotions. It's like, what do you feel? You know, what is that? What feeling is getting evoked in that? And I know men get a bad rap for not knowing what they feel. Sometimes I think women get too much credit in society for knowing their feelings when they really don't.
Well, yes. And also, and confusing feeling, you know, I remember when I first started therapy. So this was, good God, 25 years ago, I guess, when I first went to therapy. I went to therapy because I had a sponsor in a 12-step program that said every time I would call her, she'd say, how do you feel today? And I would say, good. And she'd say, good is not a feeling.
Yeah.
And she sent me to therapy. And the first thing the therapist did was give me a list of feelings. And the list was broken down into hard feelings and soft feelings. And she was explaining that underneath every hard feeling is a soft feeling. So when I was feeling angry, what is the soft feeling underneath that? It's actually, you know, sometimes sadness or fear, or right. And it took like a year's work before I could really learn to identify. And I think a lot of women, they're really clear they're angry. They're really clear that they're frustrated. What's the feeling underneath that?
Exactly.
That is the more compassionate, like it's the when I say like I'm angry, I'm not inviting anything of my partner. But when I say I'm really scared, it opens the compassion doors.
And when you're able to say that, you know, usually you'll get somebody that's like, oh my gosh, I don't want you to be scared.
Oh, exactly. Right?
You know, like, how can I help you? Instead of like, if you're angry, the person's going to be like, I'm out of here. You know, this is too much.
And if you want empathy from your partner, the you know, the sort of the quickest path to that is vulnerability. And that's hard and it's scary, but it's authentic and it's connecting.
And it's critical. It's not even optional anymore. It's not even something that maybe you can get away with not having.
No.
I think in prior generations, just for different, you know, sociological and cultural reasons, you didn't have to do that. You didn't have to know that. But today you have to know how to articulate those feelings and kind of be in that vulnerable space, which is really hard for people. It's really hard.
It is. It's scary, you know, and it's scary to be the one, right? It's scary to be the one to come out of your corner and put your feelings on the line. That's hard.
Yeah, you know, but the good news is it's like, and this is the hopeful message for everybody, you know, it's so learnable. It's so learnable. That's the biggest tragedy to me of like marriages, like not working, you know, it's like, it's so learnable, you know, it's really, that's really neat, you know, because it's not like, you know, if my wife and I have a good relationship, it's not because I have good relationship genes. It's like I grew up in the most dysfunctional, chaotic family. Like I was not modeled even a semblance of relationship health.
Yeah.
You know, and everything that I can attribute to the relationship with my wife and I, it's only come because I've been in a ton of therapy. My wife and I go to couples therapy. You know, it's just, I'm only decent at it because I've learned it, you know? So that's great for everybody to know that, you know, it's like, there's nobody's born with this stuff.
No. Well, especially in our generation. I mean, we just really weren't. I mean, we did not have it modeled to us from our parents. They didn't have it modeled to, we're really the first generation that's doing this shit.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
Like, we really are. And so, yeah, it's hard, and yeah, it's tough road to navigate, and we are actually forging the path.
Yeah.
So yes.
We're all in this together, and we're just pioneering. So it's really cool. Yeah.
We are. Well, I mean, I hope that we have touched on this. Should I stay or should I go? I mean, we've gone in so many places. We really said we were going to talk about this. Should I stay or should I go?
We totally digressed. We talked about one of the 6 points, and then we just went off on the rabbit trail.
But they are all so, I mean, if we could touch on them quickly, like we talked about incompatibility or happiness, right? And then, the idea of being in love, let's like wrap them up real quick. So the idea of being in love, what's your stance on that in a quick soundbite?
I think feelings in love kind of wax and wane, and sometimes we feel it and sometimes we don't. And that exists for even the best relationships.
Yes.
So feeling not in love is not necessarily a sign that something is really wrong.
Right. Good. Yeah. I have a friend who's been married for 27 years, I think. And she, for 2 years, God, she hates him. And then suddenly she is madly in love with him again.
Right.
And, just that's the way it goes, apparently. And then happy and incompatibility. I mean, we kind of touched on that. What's your soundbite on that?
I think that's a really horrible measure. It's almost even worse than the in love one, because I think if you get married with the idea that you're going to be married for life, that's how most people get married. Of course, you're not going to be compatible all the time. You know what I mean? It's like, this is like maybe a silly cliche, but it's like, we used to enjoy playing tennis together, but somebody stopped playing tennis, so that should be the end of the relationship. That doesn't make sense.
Right.
Right. So I think compatibility is, it's so much more complex and so much deeper than that. But I think people look at it kind of on a little bit of a too kind of surfacey way. Yep. And the other thing I would just say, just to add to that, like in the best relationships that I've kind of experienced, the differences really enhance the relationship, it doesn't break it down.
Yes.
It's like, wow, like I'm so intrigued by my partner because she's like an artist and she's really into that. And I'm so not. I'm so analytical and like I'm so curious about her. So it's like such a different frame of mind as opposed to being like, oh, like I don't know if I'm married to the right person. She's all into this art thing, and that's really weird.
Right. And and I think that I think that where this becomes critical, in my experience, is around values, and that looking at and that's one of the things that I do with my clients a lot is really mining for values in a very specific and not like picking values off of a list kind of way, but in a very personalized way. Because if there is an incompatibility and a misalignment with values, you have to look at what are the negotiables and non-negotiables there, and because sometimes there are things that are when we dig it out and we start to like sort of like an archaeological dig around values, it starts to become actually clear that some of these misalignments are critical. They are deal breakers, and that's okay, right? Because then it's not you're wrong, he's wrong, I'm wrong. It's just like, wow, look at that. That is actually like a really serious misalignment. And
I think Kate, I do the exact same thing because I have this whole thing on values that I talk with you about. So
this is why we're new best friends.
Yeah, because you're super. I think you're super right. And it reminds me. I don't work with a lot of single people, but I have this one client that I have right now, and he went through a divorce, and so he's on like Tinder and online dating and stuff, and like. We kind of went through this exercise together where he created his profile and like he wrote out his values on his like Tinder profile.
Good.
As kind of like a screening tool.
Sure.
And they're very provocative. Like he gets a lot of like kind of hateful responses.
Ooh.
But it's so great for him because he's like, man, I'm making it so clear. Like this is so really what I'm about, And if that, if you're upset by that, of course we're not going to be a good match. But people, they read it and they're like, okay, he's probably not for me because I see what he's all about, and they just kind of move on. But he's going on some really great dates with people because there's like such a clarity of like alignment right at the very beginning.
Yes, absolutely. And if you've been married and divorced and this misalignment was one of the things that was a real problem, like you're going to be really clear about that right up front. Yeah. Absolutely. Good for him.
Yeah. And I think that like, this is another cultural thing that I think we have to become awoken to, because, historically we would have married people that came from similar tribes. Okay. Yes. And so like, if I was a Catholic, there's a really good chance that 100 years ago, I would have married another Catholic girl or whatever religion or whatever community you came from. Yeah. So there was already a very implicit understanding that we married people with shared values. Mm-hmm. But today it's really different. I mean, you can go online and meet somebody that's from a totally different community, from a totally different faith history, from a totally different value perspective. And then you're like, wow, I'm really attracted to this person, but it's like, that's not enough, Right. And so I think even more so today, because we don't have that cultural piece that used to kind of bind us all. Uh-huh. I think it's even more important today that people that are dating or are divorced and kind of back out there again, that they get super clear on what their values are and how that kind of orients who they look for.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Quentin, I am just so, we could literally talk all day.
Yeah, it's really fun. Yeah. Hopefully there wasn't too much of a rabbit trail, maybe this.
No, I love it. And you know what, we can always come back and do it again. So it's great. And
every time we talk, we'll cover one bullet point and then just go crazy, go somewhere else.
Episode 6. Yeah. Kate and Quentin. Uh-huh. No, this has been great, and we'll definitely do this again. And everybody, just all of Quentin's amazing information will be in the show notes. And thank you so much. I so appreciate having these conversations with you.
Yeah, thank you. It's really great. It's super cool to talk with like a like-minded person who you kind of have like the alternate or the other perspective that I don't see as much. So it's really great.
Cool. Love it.
Okay.
Thanks for listening to the Divorce Survival Guide podcast. You can find me over at kateanthony.com, and be sure to subscribe to this podcast on iTunes so you don't miss an episode. See you next time.